time most common by the time of the arrival of Christ. Jesus, in fact, even spoke about how the Pharisees would convert, proselytize, would bring people in, and then bind on them heavier burdens than they would ever have even tried to lift. But so this absolutely was fulfilled. The roles were reversed. God's justice is unmistakable. Did Israel win their freedom from Babylon? No. It's not like they rose up and fought against Babylon and then, went back. This is all God's work. And just like when they entered into the promised land and God wanted to make sure that it was unmistakable that it was his work, this is the same. There's nothing that Israel did to win this, except they cried out to God. And when they cried out to God, he saved. So the only thing they did was humble themselves before God. Again, in our relationship with God right now, that's an exact reflection of that, isn't it? We can't win our way out of slavery to sin. It's only by the blood of Christ we can have forgiveness. Well, it's only by the power of God they could get their release from their slavery. And not only did he give them release from their slavery, they will take captive those who were their captors and rule over those who oppressed them. So not only did God free them, he actually reversed the roles. So it was an extreme salvation. Verse 3, when Yahweh has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and the hard service to which you were made to serve, God comforts them with a promise of rest here in this verse. God has given you, again, that idea that this is completely by the power of God, but he will give you rest from your pain, from your turmoil, the chaos, and the hard service. Again, how does that parallel what we have? What we have is beyond comparison to this, isn't it? We have a promised rest. They were promised rest from these physical things. We have a promised rest from our spiritual pain, from our spiritual turmoil, and the hard service that comes when you're trying to earn your own way. It's hard. In fact, it's too hard. And it's meant to be. Yes, sir.
Talking from a parallel, do we as the church ever have God sending us out into the wilderness or into captivity with us to follow if we're faithful? Do we have anything in the New Testament like that?
We have, the example of exactly going out into the wilderness and exactly facing those things in Jesus after his baptism. For the church, we have every manner of violence and oppression inflicted on them. So we have these physical things, but we have a spiritual promise. This was relief from the punishment. Well, I think if you've ever prodigal If you've ever left, it's horrible. There is pain, there is a chaos that's turmoil. If you have once been enlightened, if you have once tasted the good things of God and then leave that, it's so much worse than the physical things that they went through. And Psalm 119, there's a part in there that I love. It says, "Before I was afflicted, I went astray." In other words, I went astray and then I was afflicted, and it got my attention and I came back. And then he continues to praise God for his fulfilling of his word. And we have that. We absolutely have pain, turmoil, and hard service when we leave God. But then he gives us rest, the peace that passes understanding. If we hunger and thirst for righteousness, we will be satisfied. There's so many promises that point to the same thing. God's justice to Babylon was a reversal of position, but for his covenant people, the reversal would not be tyranny and power. Their lot would be peace. And what I mean by that is when the Babylonians came in and took over and had them, they took the power, they took the freedom, they took all of these things from them. And it takes a lot of energy to hold that. But for the people of God, when these roles were reversed, they would have rest. So it's a whole different thing when you're not trying to enforce your will on other people, but allowing God to do it. Verse 4, "You will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon, how the oppressor has ceased and the insolent fury ceased." You can tell by how the song begins, the source. Was this a rejoicing in the pain of Babylon? Was this taking pleasure in their pain? Because when I think of a taunt, that's kind of what I think of. And I guess that's why I struggled with that word, but were they rejoicing in the pain that was being inflicted on Babylon? It's a tough question, isn't it?
I want to say they were rejoicing in the justice of it.
When we read those imprecatory psalms, that's the psalms where David's crying out for his enemies to be put down, for his enemies' wives to be widows and their children to be orphans, and all those things that we look at and maybe we cringe. But he's not crying out for his pleasure. He's crying out for the justice of God. And in this, it's the same thing. They weren't crying out for the Babylonians to go through pain. They were crying out to be free. They were crying out to God to be restored, to be his covenant people in the covenant land, worshiping and doing the things that they were supposed to and they knew. So, as we go through this, it's going to look like at times that they're rejoicing in the suffering, in the pain that Babylon's going through, but if you look closely, it's not that. When we do good to our enemies, what should motivate us? Should it be because it heaps burning coals on their heads?
Yeah. I was thinking, you can't really read these people's minds, and human minds, the way we are, when somebody gets their uppance, we sometimes have to control ourselves not to feel jubilant about it, and I'm not the only one, I know I'm not the only one, and I don't do that as a rule, but I'm human.
Yeah.
And they were too, so, I think God knows that, so, yeah,
Well, and that's why I pointed to this,
yeah.
because we're told to do good to our enemy. We're told to love our enemy and pray for our enemy. And we're told Romans 12, we're told when we do good to our enemies, that it is like heaping burning coals on their head. We have to be very careful about our motivation when we act lovingly to someone who's acting hatefully to us, that it's not for that purpose. It's to fulfill the love of God, not because we know it's going to torment them.
Christ died for everyone, and that means everyone has tremendous value. So when we should try to see others through the eyes of Christ. It's easy to bring condemnation upon somebody and say how bad they are or whatever. It's harder to go and teach them the gospel of Christ, to share the good news that they are loved and a loving God who wants the very best for them. That can be very difficult for us.
Well, we're looking at it from where we're looking at these acts of God, and we have to remember that Babylon was just being used as a tool because of Israel's disobedience. It wasn't because because they were somehow better than the Israelites, but because the Israelites had left God, God used the Babylonians. And, well, if you've read the Old Testament, you know it's not just them.
And it's very hard for us to get into their head state. The closest that we can compare it to, and not trying to be political or anything, because it's on both sides of the aisle, every 4 years we go through a very turbulent time here in the U.S. But that's only 4 years. How many years was Israel being oppressed by Babylon?
Yeah. And the one thing that we do see is that the generation that goes into captivity, at least a remnant of that gets to come out. But yeah, it was not 4 years. And because of the idea of the national gods, it would be easy for the Babylonians to think, well, our God's greater than their God. It's easy enough for the Philistines to think our God's greater than their God when they defeat them in battle. But if Israel has a realistic view of who God is and grasps that, then they understand what's really going on. And it would be hard not to take the other offensively. Verse 5. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers. What are the staff and the scepter? What are those a symbol of?
Power.
The scepter. What's the staff?
Power, authority.
Yeah. Have y'all ever sorted cattle? Because you can sort them without a sorting stick, kind of, sometimes. But if you have a sorting, it's just a stick. Sometimes it has like a big fly swatter thing on the end, but basically it's just a stick. And so when the cows are coming through, you're going one way or the other. And you have that stick, and that's how you get them. That's how you direct them. That's how you try to keep them from going where they're not supposed to and keep them going where they're supposed to. That's not new. And that's not just cattle.
Sort of like an Italian with a wooden spoon.
Exactly. Or a Latina with the chongola. But anyway, but yeah, or my mom with a belt. But yeah, it's something that's used for disciplines. It's used for direction. It's used to whack them when they're going the wrong direction too.
It's a go.
Yeah. Those were sharp though. But yeah, so the staff is a symbol of the force, the might that was used. The scepter is it's a royal thing, it's a king thing, it's a sign of who's in charge. So the Lord has broken the staff and broken the scepter of the rulers. Is this the present Israel for Isaiah or the future? This was going to be fulfilled after. When he's saying this, it doesn't look probable. When he's saying this is a prophecy that is far from being fulfilled. There's no sign of fulfillment when this is prophesied. And I have a bad habit because I've read ahead, right? You get to the end of Revelation and we win. But for the people to whom this prophecy was given, we have to understand that this doesn't look likely. This is not what the world looks like. So this promise, and again, like the promise of Revelation, gives them hope in their great affliction. The church that was being persecuted by Rome gained great comfort from Revelation. And the Israelites who were being ruled over and just a tyranny over them and every sort of wrong inflicted on them would gain comfort if they received this in faith. Who did the world believe had broken the staff and the scepter when it happened? What brought about the fall of Rome? Well, if you read the history books, it's corruption from within, right? Infighting and corruption within the Roman Empire. But if you read Revelation, what brought about the fall of Rome? God. When the Babylonian Empire fell, the world, the history books will say, well, the Medes and the Persians came against them and all these things happened and they had problems within and so that's how it all collapsed and happened. But y'all, it says the Lord has broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. This is God's word. So things that the world sees as, well, this happened and then that happened and it was really unlikely, but all these things they didn't fall into place. God put them in place. And God used all of those things to bring about the fulfillment of his prophecy. Or if you look at it another way, God said it, so it had to happen. Verse 6. The rod and the scepter that struck the peoples in wrath with unceasing blows, that ruled the nations in anger with unrelenting persecution. pretty vivid, isn't it? Habakkuk 1:11, speaking of this, says, then they sweep by like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own might is their God. Their own strength, their own power is their God. How many times through history have we seen this?
Still today, North Korea.
America? Anyway, God destroyed the power and might with which they tortured, ruled, killed. God took that away. And again, when we look at this, well, we read it and, okay, well, that's what happened. But when you see how it happened and the length of time that it took, then you start understanding Hebrews 11 a lot better, where these prophets prophesied in faith but didn't see the fulfillment. But God did it. Looking at it from our point of view, it's awesome.
It's sort of reminiscent of those two worldviews. One says might is right, and the other says right is might.
Yeah. Truth, you might even say. Yeah. So, this again, in this whole chapter, maybe even in Isaiah, this is one of the things that just jumps out at me is their might is their God. Their strength is their God. And that's human nature. That's not abnormal. Y'all get that, right? This is natural man living out things just as naturally as can be. But Israel was called to be spiritual. We are called to be spiritual. And in that, God gives us a victory over the world. God gave his people victory over all their enemies when they were faithful. 7 and 8. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. The cypresses rejoice at you, the cedars of Lebanon saying, since you were laid low, no woodcutter comes up against us. Every modern translation has something weird there. It's the loggers. That's who it's talking about. It's not just Israel, but the whole world rejoicing in song. Because they didn't just come against Israel. It is the nations, the peoples, it's everybody. The whole world is at rest and quiet because this one mighty force was stopped. Does that mean that there were no wars and there would never be a war again? No. But it changed the complexion of the entire world when this happened. There's no better rest than when chaos is set in order. And we can fight against that. You can say you like clutter. I don't believe you. But when chaos is set in order, we have Satan, who from the beginning has been sowing what in the world? Sin, evil, rebellion against God, but chaos. Why eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Because it sets chaos into the world. And God is a God of order. Since I was a little kid, I heard that we are to do things decently in order because God is a God of order. Sometimes that it's taken too far, but God is the God of order. God is the God that thwarts chaos and brings peace. And it's only through the sinfulness of man that the chaos rises up. Have you ever seen this in your life? In your own personal walk of faith? Where you have chaos. You have worry and doubt, and you just have all these things weighing on you and all this chaos in your mind and in your spirit. And then when you submit to God, He brings peace. He brings order to the chaos. When we submit ourselves to Him and allow Him to do that. The cedars of Lebanon come up again, and there's a lot of, they are a symbol of a lot of things through a lot of prophecies. They're the giants of the forest that lay between Israel and their enemies to the north. That's the cedars of Lebanon. And they were in a previous prophecy. It says the cedars of Lebanon were so few that a child could count them. And here it says that since you were laid low, and this is speaking to and about the rulers of Babylon, the giants of the forest stood. There was peace. There weren't people passing through, cutting them down. It was peace for the land. When man fell, there was a curse on the serpent. There was a curse on the woman. There was a curse on the man. There's also a curse on the earth. It changed. And this is a restoration of that. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shadow to greet you. All who were leaders of the earth, it rises from their thrones. All who were kings of the nations. So we have a picture from Sheol, from the place of disembodied spirits, but it seems there's already a divide. You've read like when Jesus told the story of the rich man and Lazarus, you understand that. It's reinforcing the laid low on the previous verse, and in contrast to the peace, the Sheol is stirred up. There's something going on. There's a turmoil going on. Sheol is in an uproar at the coming of this ruler. All the other rulers come out of the shadows, shadows, to meet him. I'm not trying to read too much into this, but what does this say about a whole bunch of the rulers? Their destiny was all the same, right? So he was the greatest of the worst, but they all have the same sentence. They all have the same punishment. In fact, all who stand against God, all who are not faithfully obedient, share the same fate as the horrible ruler of the great Babylon. But in this picture, it's focusing on the rulers. Verse 10, all of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we. You have become like us. There is such an idea in the human mind that a great ruler is somehow different. The great ruler, the powerful, are somehow above everyone else. But now they're on the other side, and they see that that's not the case. They're on the other side, and they see that this great ruler, this man who held all this power, had the same sentence as them. We have to be so careful. I've met some very famous people, not on purpose, but I have. I've met some powerful people. And guess what? They're people. No matter what, no matter where, no matter how great or no matter how terrible, they're people. And in Sheol, they were still wrestling with that. I find that interesting. So the answer is, have you, like us, become weak? The answer is a resounding yes. Absolutely. He was as weak before God as any other man. The power that he had on earth was exactly that. It was on earth. The mighty rulers who dispensed injustice, suffering, and evil all share in eternal destruction. And who else will join these horrific perpetrators of evil? What about your neighbor who's a good, moral person who doesn't know God? How about the people who know that there is a God but aren't obedient? The thing is, in God's view, there is this hard separation, and on one side you have all of humanity who is faithful, and on the other side you have all of humanity that's not, and that's it. So we see degrees, and we see, well, these men were so much more horrible, but they're all equally weak before God.
I was thinking about the people, even the world or the earth, singing and rejoicing, and relating it to what it says over in Revelation 12, that when the serpent pours out his wrath upon the children of the woman, the children of God, that the earth, it says that the earth helped them. So even though they're lost and misled in many ways, they're still not completely unbroken, so that they help and rejoice when good people find God's relief.
But when the really, really bad people find God's relief, because I'm thinking of Saul on his way to kill and imprison more Christians. Yeah, great rejoicing. So they're no better than the lowest of society in our eyes, because God certainly doesn't see it that way, and Jesus spoke to that many times.
You'll often hear of people that are living in sinful lifestyles, whether they're in the gay community or something else, and they talk about God's grace and love. but they disregard his justice, that he keeps his word on what he's going to do.
God's never tolerated rebellion, not one time, not even a little bit. Verse 11, your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the sound of your harps. Maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. Whew. They're extravagant ceremonies, that's what pomp is. And their beautiful music were brought down to. All that they valued was put to a stop. We talked last week about when Cyrus came against Babylon, and he didn't destroy the city because of its great cultural importance. But that's going to be put away too.
It seems like even back then you had some whitewashed tombs.
Yep. So it looked so great from the outside by the eye of man, but God saw it for what it is. Yeah. Their plush beds and warm covers were replaced with maggots and worms. What does that mean? What's that in reference to? Graves. They looked so great when they were alive, and they acted with such pride and arrogance, but they ended up as all men do. And it's all brought down to Sheol. It's all this great power of God on full display. When the power of God comes is compared with this pomp and these harps, what does that look like? It's meaningless. It's ridiculous. The things that we lift up in our fleshly nature, in the eyes of God, are just ridiculous. Their song, again, was a celebration of the power of Yahweh when he fulfilled the promise, particularly from chapter 13. All right. Lord willing, we'll pick back up there next week. Thank y'all.
Coming up.